Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Chapter 4 of Frankenstein is where it becomes obviated the great big conundrum, the great big religious conundrum, which would have taken absolute guts to put on paper, becomes sort of a main sticking point, and it becomes something that we will have to watch for later in the novel. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for part 4 of a chapter-by-chapter read-along of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This video will contain 3 separate sections. 1, a So What Happened recap of the chapter. 2, a literary criticism section. And 3, a writer's corner where we talk about some of the lessons we can take from this chapter of Frankenstein as writers ourselves. So, what happened? Natural philosophy and chemistry for our man Frankenstein, that's it. He often works straight through the night and works straight through 2 years that way. Then things stop being useful. He considers returning home. But then he decides it would be fun to play with dead stuff. Then he figures out how to make dead stuff kind of not dead stuff, but he can't trust you with how he did it. But he does some experiments proving out his theories. Then he starts collecting bodies. Collecting body parts. Collecting bodies was a different scientist. This pursuit takes him over. He stops eating. He stops sleeping. He just plays with his meat. I mean, dead stuff meat. It's not his meat. It's pilfered meat and meat-adjacent accessories. Eyes and bones and stuff, probably. And his father starts writing to him, but he doesn't write back. He promises himself exercise and amusement when his creation should be complete. Now, there are quite a few things to get into with this chapter, but the first thing I want to talk about is something that just kind of strikes me as having some type of verisimilitude to the real world, and that is the fact that Frankenstein is putting in his 10,000 hours. We get this from NIH.gov. This is from a Malcolm Gladwell book. Throughout his book, Gladwell repeatedly refers to the 10,000-hour rule, asserting that the key to achieving true expertise in any skill is simply a matter of practicing, albeit in the correct way, for at least 10,000 hours. This is an interesting principle that comes up in the sort of self-improvement realm, in the sort of productivity realm, things like that. Malcolm Gladwell's book is now sort of, it seems there are some dubious things going on in the book from the studies that were included, but regardless, I think that the principle is pretty obvious, that putting in the practice makes the work, putting in the right practice, and putting in the right practice in an absolutely obsessed fashion will get someone to a breakthrough point in their life, in their skill set, in their pursuit, whatever it is. One of the examples in the book that's given is Bill Gates, and the fact that he had access to a computer lab when he was a child, way before anyone was really getting access to computers at that level, especially at that age. And that helped him really develop sort of the things that he needed to lay the groundwork for what it was that became Microsoft. So just an interesting little crossover um, from the world of productivity and motivation to literature, and literature from a book a couple hundred years ago at that. A very good quote from page 49 of my copy here. I don't know why I'm so caught up on words right now, but to examine the cause of life, we must first have recourse to death. I'm not real sure what to do with that quote just right now, but I think that it is really, really interesting to think about. So maybe something that we will have to come back to later on in the novel. Now, there is the bit in this chapter about Frankenstein telling us, look, I I'm not going to tell you how I did this. You don't even want me to. You don't want me to tell you how I did this because, well, then you'd have that terrible knowledge and you'd be able to do it too. So there is a little bit of question here as to whether or not this moves from science fiction to fantasy. Right? So the difference between science fiction and fantasy is fantasy has these elements and we just don't have to explain them. Science fiction, you explain them. There are gradients, however, of science fiction. There is soft science fiction and hard science fiction. Certainly, this does not maybe get to the level of Michael Crichton, uh, featured in a book haul I did recently, but basically what I said in that book haul was that it is Michael Crichton books are set up in a way that you are, if you're not familiar with all of the science going on, it's very difficult to pick out where it is that Michael Crichton is fudging with the science itself, because at some point the fiction begins, but boy, it sure is hard from the outside to tell where it is that that fiction does begin. Moving on to page 52 of my copy here, we get something that's very interesting. Is it 52? Yeah. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might in the process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. So it is pretty obvious at this point that what is inspiring this is the fact that he had so nearly lost Elizabeth and did lose his mother. These are the things that are driving him, but it seems that he himself cannot recognize that as the motivating force. This is a brilliant bit of tomfoolery from Mary Shelley herself, giving us these things from giving us all of the tools that we need to diagnose why it is that Frankenstein is so obsessed with resurrecting the dead without Frankenstein figuring it out for himself on the page, at least not to this point in the novel. I do not remember, I've been through this novel one time before, I don't remember if it occurs to Frankenstein at any point that it was his mother's death, it was nearly losing Elizabeth that had, how would you say, given him the sort of, wow, I don't know if maybe it's not really a preconditioning. It's more of a I don't know how you would call it, but that's sort of the what it is that perversed him into going after these pursuits of resurrecting the dead. Moving on here, number 5. Oh yeah, there is so in the great sort of attempt to never harm anyone's feelings, society has come up with this idea of PC culture, right? And in PC culture, you have all of these terms that don't really point quite to what it is that they mean. Unhoused, homeless people, underhoused, homeless people, right? All of these things that are sort of gesturing towards what it is that we mean, but never pointing at it. And we have this on that same page, the very next paragraph. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to create a lifeless clay? What an interesting way to say that I was grave robbing and murdering small animals. Um, just a real interesting way there for Frankenstein to let us know these things. But building towards this big point that has come up in this chapter, I want to skip forward a little bit in my own notes, but I did record them in this way on the video here. On page 53 of this copy, a human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or transitory desire to disturb his tranquility. Now, it's possible that what this is a little bit of Frankenstein giving us a lesson in Stoicism. But it's possible, pardon me, there's something else going on there, isn't there? This is a very highly intelligent individual, Frankenstein. Yes, this is a very highly accomplished individual, Frankenstein, going through all of this schooling, getting all of these degrees. So there's 2 check marks there. And then here, what we have is the observations of Frankenstein, a very highly intelligent, highly successful individual, saying, okay, look, I've observed in people this is what they do. In people, when they're successful, oftentimes they have, where is it here? They preserve a calm and peaceful mind and never allow passion or transitory desire to disturb their tranquility. Is this Mary Shelley giving us a psychopath? Psychopaths, as opposed to sociopaths, I believe I have this correct. Psychopaths are often very successful, very intelligent, very manipulative. They differ from sociopaths in this way that sociopaths are unable to really hide their dissociative sort of practices, whereas psychopaths say, I don't really want the smoke, so I'm going to use my intelligence to fit in. I'm going to fit in. I'm going to convince people that I fit in. And then, while convincing people that I'm just like them, I get to get the stuff I want out of them. Is that what's going on here? Frankenstein diagnosing what makes people successful and saying, okay, I have to put this face on, this face of stoicism that works. I will manipulate people with this face of stoicism. It's interesting to think about that. Now, the great big point here is this. In my copy, it comes on 53. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage. But my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature. So we have here Frankenstein sort of severing his work from that of nature. We have a little bit earlier, one of those previous quotes that I read you, Frankenstein saying, look, I can create life. I can make things whole cloth. I can reanimate tissue that is here. Now, okay, it's 1818 and you are writing this novel. Just pretend, put yourself in that position. You're English. There have been blasphemy laws on the books for about 300 years now. And you raise the question of, if I have a person with a soul, right? That is the assumption in the biblical text. That is the assumption in all of the religious writings. Religious writings, very big deal of the day. I have a person who has a soul, and that person dies. The soul, right? Well, it moves on. That's what we're told. In the Christian faith, the soul moves on. I believe that the understanding in the Jewish faith is that the soul is kind of non-existent until the time of resurrection. I believe. I'm far from a religious scholar. So, I have a person, that person dies. Soul is gone. I reanimate that person. I bring that person back to life. What soul is in there? This would have been a very, very sticky idea for the day. This would have been a very, very sticky subject for the time. In this book, make no mistake, there are religious things going on. We can go to the very final sentence of this chapter to look at that. And I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. My creation? There is no way that quote would have been read with anything other than religious overtones. Now, I'm not saying that this was written to be a Christian text. In fact, I think very much the opposite, just from the little bit of biography that I know about Mary Shelley, that I know about Mary Shelley's group of friends and the retreat on which Frankenstein was written. So I don't think that it was a religious text, but the world that they were living in was a religious world. So to raise this question and call these raised creatures creation is for Frankenstein to be placing himself in the role of God with his creation. And for this text to be suggesting, and look, today we have the filter of fiction. Well, it's fiction. He's not saying this. It's fiction. Mary Shelley isn't claiming these things are popular or possible. But we go back, so in the writer's corner section of this video, you're going to get a little bit of a talk about, spoilers, the fact that literature in this time felt it had to explain itself and why it existed. To explain itself and why it exists, this novel is putting us in first-person narration, making it seem as if these things really are a claim from the author as opposed to simply the speaker. Otherwise, there is no reason, quote unquote, to read this book at the time. Why wouldn't you be reading the Bible instead of Frankenstein? But while we're having a literary discussion, just past the fact that there's such cojones that it takes to write this at that time when there were blasphemy laws, and it could have very, very easily been looked at and interpreted as blasphemy, the things that are going on in this novel. It is an interesting idea for me to I think it is an interesting idea to explore if there is a soul and a person is resurrected. Is there no soul in that resurrected person? Or is it another soul in that resurrected person? Or is it a brand new soul in that resurrected person? We have resurrection happening multiple times in the actual Bible. Lazarus, Jesus, the daughter, someone's daughter. I can't remember exactly who it was. It's been a long time since I've looked at that story. But is there souls? Are there souls in those people in the Bible? Are there souls in these people? So one of the reasons it's interesting to me to think about is this kind of has precedent in folklore, but it is the folklore of voodoo. Zombies. Do zombies have souls? What souls are in those zombies? What animating spirit is in those zombies? So in this novel, we're going to go a little bit further down that rabbit hole once we start to really get moving here than we do in a lot of literature. A lot of literature uses the reanimated, uses zombies, uses the undead as voiceless, as personless, as horde. Not quite so much in this novel, which is one of the ways that, by the way, the sort of early movie adaptations of the novel are kind of shortcomings from the novel itself. But I think that there is a whole lot of horror, a whole lot of fantasy, a whole lot of science fiction, a whole lot of literature to be had in that well of, if someone is brought back from the dead, who's actually in there? I only have one writer's corner observation for this chapter, and in my edition, it comes on page 51. This is as Frankenstein is talking about some of his discoveries et al. Quote, I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and I will tell you, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his naive town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. This is breaking the fourth wall. This is the speaker, the author, maybe so not the actual author, but the presumed author of the novel itself, looking at you directly, the reader, and addressing you. This was a convention of a bygone era of novel, because the sort of idea behind novels used to be there would have to be some reason to read it. The storytelling aspect of the novel itself was kind of secondary. It the novel itself required a an announcement of sorts, an announcement as to why the novel itself should be read. That's why many older novels are first person. They come to us as an account from someone, as Frankenstein here is doing, saying, "Look, this is my story. I'm telling you." This is not necessary, per se, in today's storytelling world. You can have a third person narrator. You can have a third person narrator with a far psychic distance. All of these different things. You do not have to be acquainted with the narrator at all. The question as to whether or not to break the fourth wall for a writer becomes very story specific. It becomes kind of very audience specific. People who consider themselves, and I will use the term consider themselves, not people who are, but people who consider themselves very sophisticated readers, people who consider themselves that way, would not enjoy breaking the fourth wall in a contemporary novel. It just seems passé. It seems of poor taste. I'm not saying that it is. I think anything can be well done if you can do it well. But I think that there is a certain type of reader that this would turn off almost immediately. And because of that, maybe even indicative of that, there are a great number of editors who would be turned off immediately by something like this as well. And, well, if we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the nitty-gritty, the gatekeeper community with literature today is very much of that ilk, is very much of the elitist, I consider myself sophisticated ilk. So, something so seemingly simple as breaking the fourth wall could be something that immediately gets your story put down.